I used to put up videos like this on my main channel where I would just talk through some ideas that I had in kind of an unscripted and rambling way. The main channel has moved more into scripted content in a way that has been good for me and that I actually enjoy. I'm very happy with what I'm making, but I'm using this second channel to talk about just ideas or thoughts that I've been having that I wanted to share with all of you to maybe start a discussion, and we can just, talk down in the comments a little bit. And today, what I wanted to talk about specifically is why I am mostly, we'll talk about that mostly in a second, why I've mostly stopped buying books. Basically, I told my wife, which is my way of committing to things rather than like writing them down, really. I told my wife that I was going to try my best not to buy books in 2025. There is one addendum to that. That's the mostly. That's why I put that here, which is that for research, for what I'm writing, or for videos that I'm making, sometimes I have to buy books. Those are necessary expenses for just doing what I do for a living. And so those don't count, but I'm going to maybe run those purchases by her as a way to provide some accountability for myself as I try my best to not buy a lot of books this year. And I'm not buying any books for pleasure this year. I am going to really try. It feels almost painful to say that out loud, but I'm going to really try not to buy any books for pleasure this year. And I'm going to take a sip of coffee, then we'll talk about why. So in my last video, I talked quite a bit about the books that I plan to read this year. And I listed about 100 books. Didn't say all the titles, but gave you a pretty good hint of it. 40 of those or so are Platonic dialogues. So if that number seems high, that's mostly why. And what I didn't note, or maybe I did in passing, but I just noted that I already own all those books. Some of them I've read before, many of them I haven't. And actually, as we moved this year, I moved back in May, and as we've been really getting settled in our house, really turning into a home, I built some new shelves in my house. Maybe I'll put some pictures up here where you can see some of my book collection. I realized that there's just so many books that I own that I haven't read or that I would like to reread. And that was where the idea was born to not buy any books this year. It's a little cheesy to put it as like a resolution or a goal for 2025 to say, I'm going into a no buy or something, to use some internet slang. But I just had this idea or this realization that I was buying a lot of books and that I wasn't always reading them. And I should try and actually enjoy the books that I had already purchased, because when I purchased them, I bought them because I liked them or I thought I would like them. And by not buying them, all I am doing is just delaying the satisfaction of reading a good book or finding out that it's not a book for me. And then I'm always perpetually like buying more books to, convince myself or to, get that thrill of feeling like I'm going to read a good book, but I'm not actually reading the book. Just being honest about my sort of psychology, I like to buy stuff. It feels good to buy stuff. And I have often heard this line online that's a little cheesy again to bring up, but it's true, which is that buying books and reading books are two different hobbies. And I do like that line because it makes it clear that buying books functionally is a hobby for a lot of us. And saying I'm a big reader is actually kind of ambiguous between saying I'm someone who reads a lot of books and I'm someone who buys a lot of books. Now, I have always bought a lot of books, and that's nothing new. But it actually got worse when I got big on YouTube. And I can explain why. Because when I started my YouTube channel, I was really like a book channel. The channel has changed more about being philosophy stuff. I'm trying to do philosophy that is relevant to your life. That's kind of the theme that I've been thinking about for all my future videos. Philosophy that is relevant for people's lives. So I don't do book lists anymore on that channel. If I ever want to do a book list again, it will be on this channel. And I'm not going to do note-taking stuff anymore. I've done that for a few months. I'm not going to do that anymore. sometimes what I would do is think, oh, this might be a good book for the channel. And I would start buying books almost like speculative assets. Ooh, maybe this will be good to feature in a video. And then I could rationalize it and say, well, it's not even really spending money, right? Because you're going to earn it back, hopefully. Or, well, even if you don't earn it back, well, you'll read a good book, right? And I realized like I was just actually kind of lying to myself. I was fooling myself because I was still buying books that I wasn't always reading. Let me give you a couple of examples so I can be honest here. This year, or in 2024, so this past year, I discovered John le Carré, and I actually ended up reading 2 John le Carré novels, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I already owned 9 John le Carré novels. Let me try that again. I already owned 9 John le Carré novels. I'd bought them all together in a set. I now know that I like John le Carré. I probably should have only bought 1 John le Carré novel to see if I liked him before spending money on 9 hardbacks. But I did it. Okay. Now this year, I have decided to read all of those le Carré novels. Okay? I own them. I like the author. Why don't I read them? The same thing could be said for David Mitchell. I mentioned that in my best books, just like, the future plans part of that video. I love Cloud Atlas. Cloud Atlas is great. I own several other David Mitchell novels that I should read. So I said, okay, this year will be the year that I read them. The Platonic Dialogues that I'm reading. I have owned the complete works of Plato for years. I have read quite a few of them, okay, over a decade. But I've never just read all of them. And there's like minor dialogues of Plato that I've never read. And I've told people that they should try to read the complete works of Plato, knowing that it probably meant you would read the big ones and you wouldn't read like Second Alcibiades, which I don't even know if that's an authentic dialogue, but it's in the Hackett collection. And I decided I wanted to do a systematic project of that. I've had the materials to do a systematic project of that for years. So why don't I read it? Next year, I was thinking about doing that for Aristotle. I have the complete works of Aristotle. I have read a lot of Aristotle, but I've not read all of Aristotle. Why don't I just read all of Aristotle? The point is, I knew I already liked those authors. I owned their books. Now, if I'm saying, what should I read next? I could either go online or go to a bookstore and start buying books on the hope that I would like them, or I could read books by, things that are possibly sure things. These would be books by authors that I was pretty much guaranteed to like. And even if I didn't like all the books, it would teach me something else about the authors. I actually wrote an article over on my Substack, which I'll link below. It's not paywalled, so you wouldn't have to pay to subscribe to read it, that mentioned reading books by an author, like reading every book that an author wrote. And I think it's good advice. I think it was a good suggestion. It was just one of the many suggestions I said as like a reading idea for 2025. But then I tried to make a list of authors who I've read almost everything by or have actually read everything by. And it's a really small list. I was even realizing that I think probably just by the numbers, if you're looking at the author I've read the most of, it would be Terry Pratchett, because I've read maybe about 30 Discworld novels at this point. And there are 40 or 41 Discworld novels. So that tells me one day I should probably just read the rest so I can speak comprehensively about Terry Pratchett if I want to. Might be something to consider. I know that I like those Discworld novels, so I could try. Well, one of the things that I've talked about a lot on the channel when I was sort of making those reflective meta commentaries about reading was that having reading projects can be a really powerful thing too. And a lot of the reading that I've planned for 2025 are part of reading projects, really understanding Plato, or reading some big works of philosophy that I've really wanted to get a solid grasp on. Finally finishing up the Le Guin novels that I haven't read. Stuff like that. And as someone who compulsively buys books by authors that he likes, when he discovers that he likes one or two of the novels, I realized I already had the materials for a bunch of those reading projects. So it wouldn't even be that hard for me to start following my own advice more systematically. And on top of that, I might save some money, which seems like a pretty good thing. I can already tell that this challenge is going to be kind of hard. And here's why. I was reading Borges this morning, Ficciones, and I loved it. Okay. And I was like, I need to read more Borges. And I only own Ficciones. And I was like, okay, I know it's January 1st, but I could order Labyrinths and The Aleph and other stories. I could order them right now. And it like almost wouldn't count. So it was like, we're a day in to the year where I said I wasn't going to buy any more books, and I already wanted to buy more books. And I felt like an addict, right? I felt like an addict. Well, I was like an addict. Like I was like an addict saying, I have to buy books. I have to compulsively buy books. And anytime that's your first response upon reading it, rather than like savoring what you're reading or thinking about it or writing about it, I realized like you're probably entering into dangerous psychological territory. And so since I'm someone who wants to read a lot of books, I am temporarily abstaining from buying a lot of books, or really buying any books. I have a few other reading resolutions for the year. I might as well share them now. There's no point to make another video. And the beauty of this channel is I don't really care about like a hook or retention or anything, because this isn't really the channel that pays my bills. This is just me talking to people who might care. I also have decided that I'm going to stop reading books faster. And here's an example, right? I had said in my last video that I was going to try to read all of the Expanse novels. And I thought this would be like my escapist reading. And I picked up the first novel. I already owned it. Like I owned all of them. And I started to read it, and I was a couple of pages in, and I thought, I don't really love the writing. I don't think it's awful, but I don't really love the writing. And I probably actually want to just read another Le Carré novel. Probably want to finish the Carla trilogy. I just want to continue it. Because John Le Carré has just really spoken to me lately. I've just been loving his writing. I love him both for the stories, but also just as a writer. I think he's masterful. So I put it down and I started reading Le Carré again. I was reading Ficciones, and I was loving it the whole time. And I realized that even sometimes when you're reading your like escapist fiction, your easy fiction, we still sometimes feel like compulsively we have to finish it. And that seems absurd, right? I do think that there's value sometimes in trucking through a book that's hard, that you're not always enjoying. I feel like doing that for War and Peace is worth it. Even though War and Peace is actually very fun to read, by the way. I especially feel this way about works of philosophy, where the enjoyment often comes later when you're thinking back over those ideas and chewing on them. Reading the work of philosophy is kind of like eating your vegetables, but, just like eating a high fiber diet, you enjoy it more the morning after. But when it came to just like fun fiction, why would I read something if I wasn't enjoying it? Here's another example. I was reading Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. And if you looked at my old best fantasy books list, I put The Cosmere, number 10 on my list. And I said it wasn't the best stuff that was written, blah, 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 but it's fun. It was fun. So that's why I put The Cosmere there. And the more I thought back on The Cosmere or read other stuff, I realized like I just shouldn't have put it anywhere close to my top 10. I just really started to sour on Sanderson. I'm not going to get into tons of reasons why. I just realized there was a period of my life where I read Sanderson, honestly, mostly during COVID, where I just needed kind of easy fiction to read, and it served its purpose. And for that, I say thank you, Brandon Sanderson. But I was reading Wind and Truth, and I got about 200 pages in, and I was mad the whole time. I was mad because I wasn't enjoying it, and I thought it was poorly written, and I didn't really care about the plot all that much. I knew I probably would like the last 100 pages, because I'd like to see some of the lore or something like that. That was always the reason I read those books, it seemed. But I realized there's no point in me wasting hours and hours of my reading time, hours and hours of this fairly short life that I'm going to get to live, on a novel that I am not enjoying in the slightest. Frankly, I think that novel in particular, the writing got worse, the plotting got worse, I didn't care about any characters. I tried to think about any characters that I cared about. Sometimes I would encounter stuff that was about like lore or world building that I couldn't remember, and I didn't have any urge to remember or reflect or look it up online to try to enjoy this stuff. I just was like, I don't care. I didn't care about any of it. And it was like, if I see one more weird word that's capitalized, I was going to like throw my book or something. So I said, you know what? I'm just done. And there are people who like Wind and Truth, whatever floats your boat, man. But what I realized for me was that I was reading it almost out of a sense of obligation to like finish the series. And there's no point in doing that. So I chose not to read it. And again, I've read other fiction now that I'm enjoying more, and I am just having a good time. In fact, actually, when I quit reading Wind and Truth, I picked up Hogfather, the Discworld novel Hogfather, read that like Christmas Eve, finished it up the day after Christmas, and I was like, this is great. It's fun fiction that I really wanted, and it's enjoyable. The death novels are great from Discworld. And I realized I'm just going to do more of that in 2025. Even though I made a pretty expansive list of the books I wanted to read, I've decided that actually, if I bounce off of one of them, it's fine. I'll just move along. And I'm not going to stick so rigidly to any of those plans that I end up hating what I'm reading either. And I actually made this mistake where I started rewriting my list when I wanted to make some changes, like with more Le Carré on the list. And I just stopped writing the list. And instead what I've done is I have a series of shelves in my living room. One of them is my 2025 shelf, where I'm basically putting every book that I want to read in 2025 on the shelf. It takes up about 4 levels. And if I decide that actually there's books on those lists that I don't want to read anymore, I'm just going to move them on the shelf. I'm going to put something else there to fill it up. And then when I'm looking for my next book to read, I'm just going to go to my shelf. I'm going to grab it. I'm going to enjoy it. The weird thing, again, about being on YouTube and doing the kind of content that I do is that arguably my fun reading has declined sharply because I read a lot for videos that I'm making. I'm working on a big video about Nietzsche that might come out in February, hopefully. And I'm just reading a lot of Nietzsche and reading secondary lit on Nietzsche, which is great. However, it's not, it wasn't like the stuff I might read in my off time anyways, even though I do really like Nietzsche. So I want to actually enjoy the books that I'm reading in my off hours. I get up really early and I read before my son wakes up, before my wife wakes up. And then I try to read for a few hours before I go to bed too. I want those times during my sort of non-working hours. I want those times to be filled with books that I actually enjoy. So I'm not buying any new books. I am stopping reading books that I'm not actively enjoying, not reading out of a sense of obligation anymore. No, really, that's it. Those are the two reading resolutions. I'd love to hear if you've been thinking sort of intentionally about your reading in the new year, or if you're just like, you know what, I've just decided to stop overthinking it and I'm just going to read. Yeah, either way, I'd love to hear about it. But let me know down below, and I'll talk to you soon.